Specifically, 1985 is a major year because the Nintendo Entertainment System launched.
Although a bad year for games, technically. That's right. Because the launch titles are pretty lame.
Debatable. There's some
you
good
like
ones on
Clue
there.
Land?
Big time Clue Land. I'm a Clue Land fan.
Okay.
Yeah, but to set the stage for folks, video games and video game consoles were considered a passing fad in 1985 specifically.
Yeah, people didn't want them on their retail shelves. They were
exactly.
just like, they were like death at retail.
The NES was soft launched in Manhattan.
Well, at this point, the market had already crashed for it, right? Like, people had already decided that home consoles were a thing of the past, and so
that's right.
They took a pretty big gamble bringing the NES out at this time.
Yeah, and you could call it a really calculated gamble, right? Because the soft launch was one example of just saying, okay, let's see. First of all, they picked New York because if we can make it here, you can make it anywhere, right? Just like the Sinatra song. But also then just sort of in terms of picking up the pieces and making sure that what happened to Atari did not happen to Nintendo. And granted, we got the NES 2 years after it had already come out in Japan. That actually was 1983. But you know, we had a pretty decent launch lineup that you can sort of say was good or was okay. 10-yard fight.
So you
baseball.
went from good to decent to okay.
to okay. All
I'm gonna
those
go with
things.
pretty lame.
Yeah, it depends on your expectations.
Right,
but 10-yard fight, baseball, Clue Land, Duck Hunt, Donkey Kong Jr. Math,
Yeah,
Excitebike,
I love that game.
Golf, Gyromite, Hogan's Alley, Ice Climber, Kung Fu, Mock Rider, Pinball, Stack Up, Tennis, Wild Gunman, and Wrecking Crew.
I'd like to just point out that this is a time in gaming where you can just make a game called golf. That's great.
Should we start with Duck Hunt? Because Duck Hunt is such. It was always the poor like second fiddle on the pack-in combo cart with Super Mario Brothers. You always wanted to play Super Mario Brothers. You never wanted to play. You'd only play Duck Hunt if you were just really sick and tired of playing Super Mario Brothers, but it turns out Duck Hunt was a really good game.
Well, it's funny because you can cheat so easily.
Oh yeah, just walk up to the TV and...
Now, it's weird that that is considered a launch title because the original NES only had Rob as a pack-in, and that, of course, required the light gun. So there was different iterations of the NES over the years, but it would have been, unusual to play Duck Hunt at launch if that was even available. But of course, there was a light gun type thing, and that was the Rob the robot. Yeah. And it had a Gyromite with it, which was a light gun-ish type thing.
I never had a Rob, and I always, anytime the rare instances I saw one, which I don't even think any of my friends had one, but it would just be like, whoa, that's the like it was sort of this revered thing to me.
Yeah, same here. After the fact, I would go to somebody's house and be like, oh, you got that version of the Nintendo? Let's hook it up. They're like, no, it's not worth it.
It's not that fun.
That's like the Kinect version of Xbox One. Like, oh, you have the Kinect?
Yeah.
Well, and Rob, to a big degree, and maybe this ties in with Kinect as well, was the Trojan horse. It was the thing that maybe didn't have the Trojans inside, but it was something that made the NES look separate from just a video game console.
Right.
Yeah. Because from all marketing purposes, they were very careful not to say the word video games. I mean, it was called the Nintendo Entertainment System for a reason. Rob was the robotic operating buddy.
And they cleverly made it look like a VCR.
Yes, with zero insertion force, which was both the nifty VCR-like feature, but also that system's biggest flaw.
I used to, as a massive Back to the Future fan, which we'll get to later, and a longtime DeLorean owner, I always loved as a kid, because I fell in love with that car as a kid with the movie. I always loved the NES because this reminds me of a gullwing door.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
No,
this is all unnecessary, and you didn't have to push down the games either, which is really funny.
Yeah,
you could just put them in.
slot 'em in.
And we all discovered that.
I never knew that.
Yeah,
I always
it helps because it kind of bends up the pins so they connect a little bit better. But that's bad. That's like a design flaw that made it so all the NES 72-pin connectors eventually broke. But we all figured that out when we got Game Genie, because with Game Genie it just goes right in. You don't press down. And then it also fixes your pin connection because it like really crunches it and it makes it really tight.
Yeah, to find a working NES today that the pins aren't broken from the zero insertion force doohickey, it's really hard to do.
Does this one work?
This one, I replaced the 72-pin connector in.
Yeah, you have to.
Yes.
Yeah,
Sam
you
Claiborne,
absolutely have
ladies
to.
and
Yeah,
gentlemen.
no, Sam knows his stuff.
Yeah.
But
that
then,
might be coming home with me.
Going back to Rob, though, Rob didn't really work. Like Gyromite, I mean, I enjoyed, but ultimately it wasn't because of Rob. It was more because of like the soundtrack and sort of the arcade-like nature of. And most of that launch lineup did look like arcade-like games.
Yeah.
Some of them were ports, but they were ports that didn't look as held back as maybe the stuff you saw on Atari, which was also a big, sort of benefit for
Was
Nintendo.
Balloon Fight in that window?
No.
I didn't see it on the list,
so,
but
yeah.
it was if not, it was shortly after.
early.
I can't even begin to estimate the number of hours that I spent in the arcade playing Donkey Kong Jr. Math. So
It was not in the arcade. But early, was Donkey Kong Jr. and Mario Brothers were all really early NES games that were just straight up their arcade fare, and it looked really good on the NES. They were for some reason nerfed though. It's still unclear to me why Donkey Kong doesn't have the Cement Factory level, but they looked so presentable and nice. But the NES could do so much more, and it wasn't until Super Mario Brothers came out the next year that we really all saw that and started paying attention. Like really nobody cared at launch. The NES was destined to be a flop until they had a key piece of software that just wasn't out yet.
Which was Super Mario Brothers.
But once Super Mario Brothers came out, we all went back and played these games, and I know them all, and I do like the launch titles for their quirky, like really Nintendo-developed games for the NES, you know, and they made these home console games. They'd only made arcade games to that time.
I played so much Excitebike as a kid, so much Excitebike. It was a fantastic motorcycle racing game, and my favorite part was I would spend what I remember as hours in the track editor, building my own custom tracks.
That blew my mind.
You couldn't save them. There was no battery or memory on the cartridge, so anytime you turned the system off, your track was gone. But I would build tracks and then race them and make the little like ones with tons of little bumps and try and get the biggest air you could.
That was the thing that really blew me away about Excitebike. Going back to it was I remember playing it for so long and not messing with the editor at all. And then when we discovered what the editor was, it was like, we can make our own tracks? Like, this is nuts.
I mean, that's why, for me, I'm such a big fan of Trials HD and that series, because when it came out, it sort of, to me, it was a sort of a spiritual successor to Excitebike in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and then look at marketing in terms of what, again, was very different from Atari. In terms of when you bought the game, the black box series, as they were, had it was still a stylized representation of the graphics, but it was what you were going to expect getting out of that game.
The opposite of what Atari did, which was just big, colorful paintings of like Breakout as like an astronaut with this like rainbow projected on his face, and you know it's totally nuts. And NES did get there. I mean, Mega Man, come on. But,
classic.
But
it's like one of my favorite box arts of all time.
Amazing.
Who is that dude?
No,
What's
but
he doing?
And there's good box art. There's like Castlevania. There's actually amazing box art with like Dracula in the background. But yeah, it's really clever how they're like, this is what you're getting. It actually looks this good. You know, they have that picture of Ice Climber, and then there's like a big polar bear sunglasses. Like that's what this game is about.
Yeah, and then lastly, at least in terms of again learning from the mistakes of Atari, was the seal of quality, so to speak, or just the Nintendo seal, as it was.
Yeah,
was really just a label to tell people buying games, hey, this is approved software. Like this is actually legit.
But that seal was on a lot of crummy games too.
That's fair.
And it was also used for nefarious purposes later on with like squeezing out third parties and all.
Sure, but look at the Atari situation, right? Anyone could put a game on an Atari, and Atari could do nothing about it.
Yeah.
So the fact that Nintendo made you have to go through licensing ultimately worked in their favor because it didn't oversaturate a market that was still trying to rebuild.
Yeah,
still goes on today.
Yeah, their biggest problem though was they were a little too strict towards third parties, which would eventually come back to bite them.
It didn't harm the NES.
No,
that was quite a success.
Not. Yeah,
and it brought back video games. It put video games in houses again.
Yep, absolutely.
I just remember, I don't know how you guys got your NES, but for me, I grew up in a Catholic family, and so it was, generally a lot of people in a Catholic family, and when I made my first communion, that's kind of a big deal if you're Catholic and you're a kid, and your family will shower you with money on that occasion. You'll get cards, like first communion, congratulations cards, and they'll have like a check or 20 in there or something, and I took all that money, and I don't even remember how much the NES was, and that's how I bought it, because I'd seen it at friends' houses, and I knew about it, and I wanted it, and that's finally.
Do you remember what game you associated with? Was it Super Mario Brothers?
Well, that's the thing. I didn't. I was born in 1980, so I was around for the NES launch, but I actually didn't get one until a couple of years later. So that's what I referenced earlier. I had the system, without the ROB and with the Super Mario Duck Hunt combo pack-in cartridge.
I think
the challenge set.
I think that was kind of the one that everybody had. Like I feel like that was.
I started with the Power Pad.
Once again, I mean, Sam Claiborne over here. So.
I mean, I played the NES a lot before that, but I didn't get one until the Power Pad came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had the deluxe set. The thing I'm having trouble remembering was it 86 or 85? And I didn't know what a Nintendo was. We had an Atari for a day in my house, like just a day. My mom bought one, hooked it up, saw the quality of, I think it was Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man, the port, and was like, this is garbage. And just packed it up, sent it back. And I cried my eyes out because I wanted that in the house, but she was like, no, this is not good enough. And then later we got an NES. I had a Rob the Robot. I remember being frustrated that Rob didn't really work with the game so much, so I just ripped the controller.
Buttons.
Yeah, it will press the buttons.
And the game can just simulate that by, but instead this contraption of picking up gyroscopes is pressing a little lever that presses the buttons on the second controller.
Exactly. Well, I found a better solution. I basically handed the controller to my sister and was like, so you hit A or B and you get me through and we can do this.
Because it opens doors in the game,
Exactly, yeah.
He's a good-looking robot, though.
He is.
Great looking robot.
Yeah, he's a great-looking robot.
Sharp young man.
And that's why people have fond memories for it, even though, I mean, it's even in Smash Brothers today.
Yeah.
But honestly, it was
Star Fox 64.
A failure.
You know, in Japan, Rob was never a pack-in. It was an accessory, and it's white and red like the Famicom there, and it looks incredible.
Yeah, it looks super cool.
It's also really rare from what I've read, too, in Japan.
Find him? Oh, in Japan.
Yeah,
I remember the Power Glove a lot more than I remember Rob.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys remember...
An equally useless peripheral, by the way.
You guys remember Kung Fu at all? This was an NES port of a game made by IREM. It was a separate Japanese developer, not made in-house.
That's the one where you go left, up, right, up, like you just work through the dojo?
Absolutely.
That's when, oh yeah, I played the crap out of that game.
Yeah,
I felt old-timey when I was playing it, though. Like, that was one of those games I was like, oh, this feels like an older game. Yeah. It was like, 2 years old. Well, it's probably 4 years old, because in '83, I mean, it probably came out in Japan.
Absolutely, yeah. No, but just the fact that it still managed to capture the feel of what was the arcade version of that game, to me, was what worked for it. And I just like the idea of I mean, Kung Fu and martial arts were all the rage in the 80s. Like, everyone was trying to put it in everything. So I fell in love with that game, even though I came to it late.
Mario Brothers was a pretty good port.
Yeah.
Just not Super Mario Brothers, just Mario
Brothers.
Yeah,
just the original, absolutely.
Yeah, they did a good job with that one.
Yep. All right, so let's head over to, anybody play Oregon Trail? That was another big release.
That was on played that on like every middle school Apple computer.
Yeah.
That was huge.
Yeah, that was the thing. Is like if you grew up in the late '80s, early '90s, and you had dedicated computer lab time, which was a big time thing in California.
Yeah.
Like they wanted to emphasize getting hands on a computer for kids, right? So I remember playing Oregon Trail every Wednesday for at least a couple of hours during computer lab, and I really loved it because you could
kind of a roguelike.
Yeah, you could name it after your friends, name the characters after.
Or you could name the characters after people that you didn't like, and then run into a river, or like
you've died of dysentery.
You wouldn't feed them. Like it was a really great way for me to get back.
You gotta ford the river.
Yeah,
you have to stop and shoot the buffalo.
You'd be playing, and then you'd turn around and be like, "Hey, Chris, you drowned, sucker."
Well, it's like in that era, all I wanted to do was go home and play Nintendo. Like that's all I wanted to do. And that's what every kid wanted to do. So like the fact that I could go to school and play anything, like they would never have a Nintendo in school. Yeah. So we had to make do. And they had educational games like Oregon Trail and Number Munchers and stuff like that. But Oregon Trail, like it felt a little bit like janky and boring and old, but it was what you had, and it was a video game, and all I thought about at the time was
a friendship murder simulator.
Exactly, and also think about how much you learned. At least now you know how much oats you should take on a cross-country trip.
You know what typhoid and dysentery are.
And then I gotta get to Oregon.
Yeah,
I gotta get to Oregon.
Yeah.
And it was not easy to make it all the way to Oregon either.
I don't remember having ever made it.
Yeah, it was pretty rare.
Yeah,
Is that because we were bad? Like, if I played it now, could I figure it out, you think?
Yeah, but I think
would hope so.
I think the Oregon Trail today is a totally different game because it's mostly you just buy like really fancy coffee and then you just fly Virgin up to Portland and that's it.
All right.